Good evening, and welcome to this August 20th, 2018 special meeting of the Board of Directors of RA and a work session with the Fiscal Committee. We want to make a special thank you to the Fiscal Committee for letting us have a combined meeting with your normal Monday night meetings and have us with you for this important session discussing the budget. So with that, let us look to the agenda, and as we will walk through the agenda today, we'll do member comments first, then we'll work through the budget work session. At that, we'll have Larry talk through the staff presentation, and then David, I believe you'll work through a short PowerPoint from the Fiscal Committee, and then we will have an open discussion. Then, if any fiscal team members would like to stay, that's perfectly fine. If any fiscal team members are thinking, okay, I've had enough, I'm ready to go at that point, that's perfectly fine as well. And the board will continue to discuss our Rest of Association letter, the Fairfax County, to Fairfax County on the small work groups that was over the last month and a half. Then we're going to adjourn into a quick executive session as a board, and then adjourn. With that, I think the first thing, do we need to move to adopt the agenda? I think we do. So with that, can I get
I move to adopt the agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, that is our agenda. As we have a combined work session tonight between the board and the Fiscal Committee, we think it a good idea if we could kind of go around the table and introduce ourselves to make sure everyone is knowledgeable of who they're working with. I'll start. Maybe we can go Julie around, and Karen, I'm sorry, you'll be the end of the train there, the caboose. All right, so I'm Andy Siegel. I'm the president of the RA Board of Directors and excited to be here to work through some of these budget ideas.
I'm Julie Bitzer, and I'm South Lakes District Director, and I've got a frog in my throat. So, go on.
Well, that's appropriate, living near the lakes. Larry Butler, Acting CEO.
Anthony Champ, General Counsel.
Scott Severs, Fiscal Committee.
Brian Gerga, Fiscal Committee.
I'm Dave Kerr, Fiscal Committee.
Good evening, I'm Paul DeGroot with the Fiscal Committee.
Good evening, I'm Mark Stapel with the Fiscal Committee.
I'm Ben Nair, I'm At-Large Director as well as the Fiscal Committee Liaison.
I'm Karen Anton, Hunters Woods Dogwood District Director.
And on the phone we have...
Calling out speakerphone, Treasurer, President Association.
All right, Eric, thanks very much. We do expect John Mooney, another director, to be joining. We've been communicating with him over the last hour in email, and I think he's on his way, but we thought we better kick off and get in flight, and so expect him to join. Do you know, David or Mark, will there be other members of the Fiscal Committee, do you think, will join in flight? Possibly? Possibly.
I think we're still expecting Jill, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so if it's all right, we'll just kind of have them all join and we'll stop and try and catch them up a little bit if appropriate, and then continue on. With that, I think it's time for member comments. If there are any, did anyone sign up outside, or would anybody be willing, like Larry, to go and see if anyone signed up? Thank you, Larry.
There are no signatures.
No signatures. So how about, look at that happy-go-lucky audience out there. John Lovis just walked in and others. So anybody want any 3 minutes to make any public comment before we begin in the meat of the meeting? Looks like
I sound prepared as I am.
all right. Do you want to yeah, oh yeah, there is a microphone up there, John. So yes, that would be great.
We are talking about the meetings, the zoning issue tonight. Is that
We're,
still on the agenda?
The board, after the budget thing, will discuss a letter that we've written to this county about the 4 sessions. So yes, it is appropriate.
So it would be appropriate to speak to that.
So if you could state your name and address, and then and then let us know your thoughts. Thank you.
John Lovis, I'm at 11437 Washington Plaza West in Reston and beautiful Lake Ann. Okay. The rezoning, the upzoning, if you will, topic. First of all, I want to thank all of those involved from Reston Association, from the Coalition for a Planned Reston, from the county for the work you guys have done, I guess, over the last 2 months, series of 4 meetings for the first really open and frank discussion between the two sides on a very thorny zoning issue. I mean, should we have 60,000, 120,000, or should we shoot for 200,000 people being here in Reston? It's little issues like that that were at stake. And I thought you guys did just a tremendous job of getting everybody together for the first time, had a real discussion, unlike some of these public meetings we've had that were just open warfare. And the meetings were good. You went subject by subject. You went through infrastructure. You went through recreation. You went through this, through that. And then at the end, it looked to me like the two sides sort of stood up and patted each other on the back and said, wow, that was really good. And they didn't finish the work. And by that I mean there were no conclusions at the end in terms of what are we going to recommend by way of, shall it be 16 per acre or 14, 13? What is it we're going to recommend? And what makes up that 13, 14, or 15, i.e., how much additional development are we going to allow in the village centers? How much additional development in the corridor? What are we going to do about the golf courses? How are we going to implement what we think makes sense if we've come up with numbers and if we've in fact come to conclusions, which the group did not come to any conclusions to my knowledge? What would be the markers so that we have this one complaint that everybody has, everybody's raised it, we shouldn't have things being built faster than we're building the infrastructure to support them. How do you know that? What are the triggers, as a famous man that I've heard here in the community say, as a matter of fact? What are the triggers that will stop the process so that it can right itself and we can get back on track? That's like, you've done step 1, but there's this major step 2 that you really decide where it is you want to go as a community. And to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have not begun that discussion. I would say that I would hope tonight, with your letter, that you make sure that everybody's on the hook to finish the job. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And indeed, I believe the letter does address many of the points that you're bringing up. So it'll come out tonight. So yeah. All right. Thank you. Anyone else? We had no more signups. Anyone else want to participate in member comments? Seeing none, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is our main agenda item for the evening, our 2019 Draft 1 Budget Work Session discussion. And we'll kind of work that as we'll start by turning it over to our acting CEO, Larry Butler. He's going to take us through a staff presentation on the budget and kind of where we are now and some thoughts, tools, other things that Larry and staff are thinking about. Then we're going to turn it over to Ben and David, who are going to chat with us with a very short presentation from the Fiscal Committee's thoughts. And we'll listen to that. And then I'd like to begin some dialogue, and I'll try and lead a conversation from all of us where we can kind of explore the things we've heard a little bit in more detail and come to an answer. Well, at least get closer to where we're headed. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? All right. With that, let's turn it over to Acting CEO Larry Butler.
Thank you, President Siegel, and welcome everybody. So I'm going to go through a relatively brief presentation. The Fiscal Committee actually saw an earlier version of this. There have been just a couple minor updates to it. The board will see it for the first time in its full beauty. But what I want to do first, I didn't want to put this on slides because it is a lot to read, but it's up there for people to review and understand. And these are the policies and purposes right from our deed about what the association is for, what we're legally bound by that deed to do, and serving our members, providing facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'm not going to read those. I think they're really important to set the foundation for what we are going to talk about tonight, about what essentially what our mandate is as a corporation. And then on the right is just a quick list of the core services we provide, covenants administration, design review, as well as all the parks and rec types of activities, which is not only taking care of the facilities that our membership enjoys on a daily basis, but also the programming that goes into that. So it's kind of a backdrop of everything we're going to talk about tonight. So I just wanted to point that out. And at your leisure, feel free to study those. I can send them out in short form as well. But anyways, I just want to point that out. So let me just go through this. Got to make sure that I get this thing working. So I'm going to use the scroll here, so it's a little bit wacky, so I apologize for that. So I'm going to start with the operating budget, or as we affectionately call the OPEX. And the budget development process that we utilize, I instructed staff, use 2018 budget as a baseline. We don't know what the 2018 actuals are yet. We will certainly get to that. Morning, John. And after we get the August actuals from our finance department, our staff is going to be doing really hard, deep dive on those 2018 year-end projections. So that'll be an important piece that not only the fiscal committee but the board will get coming up as we move into draft 2. We've included only mandatory new initiatives. I'm going to go over those here in just a couple minutes. Those are things required by statute, such as the reserve study, code changes, and things that we consider are mitigating operational risk based upon some of the old proprietary software that we're using that's not, frankly, supported at the level we think it should be to protect the members' interests. And we will provide a list of optional new initiatives for consideration with draft 2. I'll be talking a little bit more about that here in a bit. So some of the key drivers on the revenue side is we have unrealized revenue in 2018 that we're not including in 2019. I think most of you have heard about this in the past. There was a facility sponsorship piece that was about $200,000. It was based on some prior relationships. And quite frankly, with the staffing changes we've had starting this spring, we've not been able to hit the ground and go out and fully develop those relationships. So that is not going to be realized. In addition, we have some proper money that will come in, but the way those are trending right now is that those are going to come in at the sale as opposed to lump sums. So those will be coming in towards the end of the year and then actually into 2019. And so we're not going to recognize as much on the revenue side for proffers going into 2019. Lake House and tennis revenue are also down. We're looking closely at that. And then just a small item, CSF, each year we sell equipment that has, basically been expired or replaced, and I think we had about $28,000 in those sales last year. Won't have that next year. And then what we've also included is the employment cost index increase, which is what we're limited to for the transfer fee. That's an additional $12K. And then some of the key drivers on the expense side, we have factored in a 5% increase in the health insurance premium. We typically get our renewal proposals in, I think, September, typically. So in the past, it's sort of trended about 5%, so we went ahead and included that because we think that should be close. Won't be exact, but close. And then as we get those figures in, we'll obviously update those in the actual budget. The headquarter lease payment increase over 2018 budget. That is a situation that I think most of you have heard about, where we had anticipated a potential rent decrease, and that is not going to be realized. And so we're going to carry the full rent into 2019. And if at some point we are successful, we'd like to see that come down, but that's essentially all we can talk about that at this point. But that decrease is not going to be carried forward into the 2019 budget. Legal services, while we have our new general counsel here, he's doing a great job for the association, unfortunately, we've seen an uptick in lawsuits. And we have from the D&O standpoint, and maybe Anthony can explain this a little better, but we have included money which we hope we don't have to spend in case we have to pay out, I guess, 2 deductibles on 2 lawsuits. Something we hope never happens, but want to expound on that?
So I'm sort of forecasting in a vacuum because there was a large budget set out for previous legal fees that included your deductible if you got sued under your D&O policy. D&O is your directors and officers policy. If we are sued, for instance, for failure to enforce our governing documents, let's say a DRB application was improperly denied and a lawsuit was brought against the association, that triggers D&O coverage. That deductible is $25,000. I have been made aware of at least 2 threats of litigation, and that since my time here, and that's what I am conservatively forecasting that on. Two instances of paying $25,000. Your existing budget from 2018 was $25,000. So I'm looking at $50,000 with the hope that it's never necessary, but that there's not going to be a significant variance if lawsuits were to occur. Lawsuits as a whole tend to increase as the economy increases because people have more money to fight with. So we're seeing a increasing economy. Chances are getting better and better that someone's going to decide to fight a decision of one of the committees or something along those lines.
So the 30K is the increase?
Increase, correct.
And the lease payment, while you may continue in the negotiations with the firm, right now you're assuming that we will not see any.
Correct.
Okay. And this is their proposed.
I don't want to
Is this an
speculate.
increase over what we were paying or what we had budgeted for?
There's an annual increase in the base rent.
Okay, so so you're fixing what was short in 2018 and adding to 2019.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
And the transfer fee, what are we transferring?
That is when a Reston property is transferred or sold, then there's a transfer fee associated with that.
Oh, so
But
that's
if you're moving from
money
one, if
for
you're
us.
an owner and you move into another house in Reston,
Okay.
you don't pay that. It's for essentially new transfers. Then the last thing on this page, we have not backfilled the capital projects director position, and Chris Shoemaker has stepped up. His staff is doing a great job. We're anticipating keeping that position unfilled into 2019, and I'm going to give Chris some additional support as well. And it's no secret to anybody around this table, we've had a lot of staff changes, and we're lucky, I guess, that many of those positions have been backfilled under budget. So we're factoring, and that 90,000 is being factored in as an overall net savings going forward into 2019. And then real quick, these are the initiatives that I wanted to talk about. The Property Owners Association Act of Virginia requires community associations, HOAs, every 5 years to do a reserve study. We are due for that cycle in 2019. We have incorporated $60,000 into the budget for that. That is something we bid out and competitively review. And I know that the Fiscal Committee has an interest in this process as well going forward into 2019. There'll be a lot of staff involvement, so that has been included. POA software, this is actually something we worked with the board officers earlier that we're incorporating it in very soon actually, but we want to carry that forward. Right now, the POA software that we're using was supported by one staff person who no longer works for the association, and that's risky because we have a legal duty to those transactions, and so we are outsourcing that to a private software vendor to take care of that for us. And we think that's really important so we don't have to rely necessarily on internal computer support. It's a fully vendor supported system. Dechlorination system for pools, it's a new counter requirement. I do have an update on this, and so you'll see this reflected as we go to draft 2. The county is going to let us split that in half, so that'll be about 20 per year. So we do half in 2019 and the other half in 2020. So again, that will come down. Member suite, billings and collection software. Again, this is the other one where we're using antiquated proprietary software that, again, the person who no longer works for us is not here to support that. We are getting a little bit of support from one of our contract vendors, but we don't want to rely on that on an old system. So we want to upgrade to, quite frankly, a new, robust, or more robust system. This was actually funded to the level of $75,000 in this year's capital budget, but given the transition in the finance department and in IT, we thought this was probably not the best year to try to deploy that. Let's wait till we're up to full staff and really do that correctly. It will also include the $30K annual license fee, and that's what we have added as the new dollars, and that's the annual support for that. The 75 will be a capital carry. And moving on to the next page, targeted marketing. We want to increase our non-assessment revenues, and we want to do some more intense, sort of a targeted marketing, whether that's Facebook or other digital posts and so forth. And I was talking to Mike recently about this, and this will change as well because it's actually a $10,000 ad from what we currently have budgeted in 2018. So this will come down as well. So already, just in the last couple of weeks,
Saving us money even on these slides you're doing today, Larry.
I got about 30,000 coming in 2019. And pickleball, this is
Larry, it's actually 11.6.
11.6, okay.
Yeah, it's 8,400 this year, so it would actually, the proposal is to go to 20,000, so it's 11.6.
okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification. And then, what I just want to put this up here because I know the Fiscal Committee had talked about programs and so forth, and I know working with former Treasurer Sridhar Ganesan, we talked about those business proposals and so forth. So I know Laura Kowalski, our Director of Recreation and Environmental Ed, wants to bring some program proposals forward. So I know that she's been working with, I think I talked recently with Julie and Andy and others too, to just how that's going to be formatted. So hopefully you'll see that soon. But I wanted to show that. And this one actually would be a revenue positive, but I just put it in there at 0 as a placeholder so I could discuss it at this meeting. And then let's switch to capital real quick. So the baseline for our capital is derived from the reserve study, which again is done once every 5 years. The last one was done in 2014. The figures are annually adjusted based upon condition, the inspections we do, and the remaining useful life. And again, our capital assets are a value of $5,000 with a useful life of 3 or more years. That's our base plate for that. We will complete the reserve study, and that will greatly inform in the years going forward what needs to be budgeted in the repair and replacement reserve fund for those assets, because in the past it has not included soft costs. So we're gonna work with whichever firm gets chosen. We'll work with them as well as the Fiscal Committee to look at what's the real cost of doing those projects. So going out and replacing replacing the asphalt on a multi-purpose court or a tennis court, that's pretty straightforward. But the larger, more complex projects where you may have to get an architect, an engineer, permitting, and so forth, how do we get a good handle on those soft costs? And Chris and his staff are doing a much better job with that already, and we want that to be reflected in the reserve study so that those numbers are not just this static at one point, but they really reflect what the costs are going to be to replace those assets. And so the notable projects in 2019, we've got Lake Audubon dredging, which actually had been moved from 2018, and we did Lake Throw this year. That's $850,000, and that's sort of the biggest single piece. We have the Hook Road improvements, which are currently in there. But again, I want to be really clear because I know there was some discussion about this. Those are the reserve study figures that were a 5-year look ahead, and we pulled them together because if we're going to go in there based upon the Hook Road Working Group recommendations to do work, there are economies of scale of getting in and disturbing that site at one time and not dragging out, projects over 2, 3, or 4 years and disturbing the park. So the Hook Road Working Group is close. They haven't totally finalized that, but we're hopeful in the next couple months they will have their final recommendations on that overall concept. Even with that, though, it's important to understand that it is a concept plan, and it's going to require some architecture and engineering estimation to really figure out what's it going to take. So if they, for instance, without getting into too much detail, they say, we want to put a pathway from here to there. Well, what is the grading required? Are there handrails required? Is it ADA accessible? What are those factors? And so while we can come up with a sort of a generalized scope to get those exact numbers that I think the board and the community are going to want to know, we will have to actually spend some money to get that estimate. Because we don't want to burn bridges with our contractors and say, hey, will you give us a bid on this project? Say, well, we're not really going to do it right now. We just want you to go spend all the time bidding it. So we want to be careful about and very intentional about how we get those costs. So those are two things that are currently in the capital budget. And then again, a reminder that the Repair and Replacement Reserve Fund is funded annually based upon our finance resolution of the 10-year rolling average of what we forecast, which is, again, going back to the baseline, which is the reserve study. And so that is what the board has been doing now for, gosh, I don't know, I guess 5 years, I think, yeah, by resolution. So essentially that comes right off the top and is set aside for the reserve funding right at the beginning of the year.
How much have reserve studies cost us before?
They vary, 40, 50, but I was talking to Chris, and we want to make sure that we do a better reserve study than we've done in the past.
More thorough.
And so
Yeah.
I think we've added 10,000 to that because, again, we want to make it better than any of the prior ones we've had. So it would be great if we didn't spend all of that, but I'd rather have the funding there to do it right than to miss the mark. Let's get down to the next slide here. So with all that said, and I think you all have seen this, this is the sort of an assessment impact summary. And this is based upon the draft one that staff put together with the things included that I described to you. And to operate at that, straight out, it's a $39 assessment increase. I know that Eric mentioned that at the board meeting, I believe, as well. And, the assessment went down for the first time ever going in 2018. 2017, we were 692, it went down to 682. And, it put us a little bit in a hole, particularly in light of the fact of the two things that I narrated earlier about the revenue side and then the expense side. So those are, I guess, shall we say, unfortunate circumstances? I'm not sure of a great way to describe that. But with that, that is the situation right now. So moving from that, and what I'd like to see a lot of this discussion focus on, if possible, tonight, is how do we deal with that? And so what I've got here are some potential strategies as we go from draft 1 to draft 2. So just to, for the sake of discussion, I put together, and I've got actually, Julie, you can pass these out. There, and then go down this way with a few. This is just
Can I ask you a question about the assessment base?
You sure
while
can.
we're doing that? I remember at one point we were anticipating some of the apartments to come online, particularly across the street. I think since we drive past those all the time. There's some other housing that, like the Seekers and whatever. When are you reflecting those in 2019? Are we assuming
Seekers,
those, or did we forecast too much in 2018 because things didn't come into our?
let me answer that there's two ways. So we have incorporated the Sunrise Square, the Seekers project. We have not incorporated the Valiant Park because they're going to be starting on their model soon. We're not sure how many of those will actually be sold and.
That's the one in the corridor?
Right. Mhm.
Okay. What about the apartment complex on?
The Pulte one over by the Wheelie Metro.
No, the one right here across the
Oh.
golf course.
Yes,
By.
they're included. Yes,
Were they included in 2018?
yes, yes. And those came in slower because we've been.
So we
We've been
anticipated more
working
than
with
we
them.
got, because they didn't
Yes.
come online as much.
as
But we're
fast.
anticipating all of them in
Those-
2019?
Yes, those will be on. They should all be online in 2019. So again, for the sake of the discussion here, this initial proposal was to have a 2.5% increase in the base assessment, so go from 682 to 699, it's a $17 increase. Consider expense cuts, go down 2.5% from draft 1 to draft 2. And that's, again, this is for discussion. We'll hopefully get some direction from the collective group here.
So again, Larry, when we talked earlier and we started off by talking about tools, these are all
Right.
different tools one has in their tool belt to affect the budget. And so either you've talked about increasing assessment, you've talked about cutting expense. So,
Right.
and there's a few more.
Or
Okay.
some combination.
Yeah, the combinations thereof, exactly. And then the application of investment earnings, and then consider the use of operating reserves. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, we get the vast majority of our revenues in December and the first 3 months of the year, because assessments, the billing goes out, they're essentially due January 1st through the end of February. That's the time frame. So we get about 85% of our revenue at that time. And so operating reserve is essentially, it's cash on hand. So while we're going through and out of our main concentration account, paying our bills and so forth, we may get to the end of the year and we've got $2 million. I'm just picking a number because I don't have the figure right now, but $2 million in the account, or even $3 million, and we know that in December we're going to have expenses of 1.1, 1.2 million, just roughly. And so I know a decision that the board had made in the past is, well, what's a safe level, essentially in the cash, to carry us through, December and really even into January. But by that time, there's a lot of revenues coming in, so that we can, offset some of that assessment with that reserve. So again, there'll be more about that. Actually, we had our former CFO come in last week, talk with us a little bit about that, because there's a complex. You all may understand it from the financials, but it is a complex calculation based upon, as we get towards the year end. And also, we'll factor in what our projections are. So how close are we going to be to what we expected our revenues to be and what we expected our expenses to be as we get to the end of the year as well. We hope those are closely balanced, but that's, again, when we get into doing our year-end projections starting in the next month, that will help inform that decision as well. But it's just, again, a tool, and then if there are other recommendations that the board has, Fiscal Committee or others.
Is it okay if I talk to say the operating reserves in a different way and make sure that everyone agrees? So operating reserves also can build up a little bit over time as, revenues may be higher than projected and expense is lower than projected. And so that reserve builds up a little higher than you project it to. And you can tap into some of that extra that is built up over time. This would be another way I would think of saying a similar thing.
Rainy day accounts.
Well, you don't want to think of it as a rainy day account particularly, but it's basically, if the association does well, we've in essence overcharged our members, and so tapping into it would be a refund of that. The key is figure out how to make sure that we don't ever get into a situation where we run into a cash crunch at the end of a year. And there may be, I mean, I think one of the things that our committee needs to investigate is whether we have a fairly conservative long-term portfolio for the repair and reserve fund based on the investment strategy. It's about 50% bonds and cash. There may be some way, if we really hit a big expenditure, that we might be able to borrow against ourselves in a way that wouldn't necessarily, against short-term assets that wouldn't necessarily affect the performance. I mean, it should not be done on a regular basis, but we may be able to find a way to reduce the needed operating reserve on a regular basis closer, to zero. Because why would we just be maintaining cash for no reason? Obviously, we don't try to budget to. And we'd like to do better than what we budget, but that part we're going to do our best job possible every year as a committee and a board, and whatever that is, if we do better than we expected, great. But we might be able to fine tune that look on in terms of just what we need. If a dam breaks or something happens, how do we fund it?
I'm going to pare it back a little bit. What I think I heard you say, and then we'll kind of keep going, and then we'll let David do his thing. But thank you, Mark. I think pare it back. The first part is the use of operating reserves is a tool. Mm-hmm. That reserve builds up over time when we have higher revenues than we thought in the budget or lower expenses. And as Mark described, then that's a way of, if we do feel that level is adequate or over adequate, there's a possibility of paring it down a little bit and using it in the budget to balance it. The other piece I think I heard you say was that if people are familiar with borrowing from their 401k account or whatever and then repaying it over time, you might be suggesting a similar thing with the minimum balance of the repair and replacement fund that's in that resolution and then paying that back over time. And let's discuss that later, but I think you were, when the last bullet there says other recommendations, I think you gave us a potential other recommendation there. Right. True? Okay, can we go back to Larry?
If I could interject real quick.
Please, Eric, yes, thank you. I didn't see you raise your hand. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. For context, in the past, we have used those operating reserves to buy down the assessments. We also use those operating reserves that built up over time to pay off the Tetra loan. So it's not, if you think about that, it is something we have done in the past, right? I mean, and so it's a tool. I mean, we can decide whether we think it's a smart move or not based on the level of reserves we have in December at our low point. But for context, we have done a past.
Right. So there is precedent that boards have done this for years. And so thank you, Eric. That, again, this is not breaking new territory. Thank you, Eric. All right, Larry, anything else?
Just a couple, again, just a reminder of the calendar here. So we're up here at our special meeting, and whatever guidance staff gets tonight, we want to incorporate that as we go from draft 1 to draft 2 and present that to the Fiscal Committee in September and obviously the board as well. And there'll be a lot of work staff will be doing, I presume, in between the now and then. And, again, probably one of the things, there may be initiatives from committees, members, board members. And again, we've incorporated none of this because what we're trying to do is just let's get this playing field set and then see where we're at. So just want to remind people
Have
of that.
all the committees been asked to?
The only number it won't be is what's on the page. It'll be some other number, okay? But it'll be, but none of the additional, what I'll call marketing numbers, communication revenue is in there. For the second, we've taken that obviously out because, we've said we just can't make that happen. On the spending side, okay, what we're saying is, we've already saved $500,000. We're probably going to save a little more in people. We've still got some openings and positions for at least a few more months. And we also know we've got a budget shortfall in our facilities rent, which we must cover. And that's around $200,000 this year. So what that says is we will spend the entire second half budget we're not cutting anything. We'll spend the entire second half budget. We'll add another 200,000. We'll probably save a little bit in people. And maybe we'll end the year then at rounded 14.7 million of expenses on a revenue of 17.9. And so what the fiscal committee would like to just say is that, if we think that that 14.7 is, makes any sense or might look right, maybe we'll learn that in the next few months as we do a forecast. Starting from there and then looking at what do we need to do? Let's go back to this list. We know we've got things we've got to do. Okay, let's start adding them from there, not from a budget that is at 15.1. So we just think the starting point might be a little more. And if we do that, gee, maybe we can hold that. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could hold our assessment? But that's not our job. We're not worried about the assessment itself. We're more interested in looking at revenue and expense. The board can deal with, what do they really think, the assessment should be and where should it go, okay? So we're trying to focus on revenue and expense. What comes out of that is, again, if I go all the way over to so now I got a forecast. If I go over to changes for next year, okay, I'm taking out the revenue. I'm taking the additional revenue out. Some revenue came out in 18, more will come out in 19 to get down to the amounts that we said in Larry's slide wouldn't happen. But we've got to add some spending. Now, we've added a very arbitrary $200,000. That's not right, but it's a starting point for the discussion. But by doing that, we're saying, gee, maybe we could hold our assessment if we could hold our spending down to 14.9 or 15. Again, we got this kind of 18, 15, 3 type of concept we're thinking of. What it does do on the page is it leaves the capital number a little light. It says 2.884 on here. I know that the work that's been done is said it ought to be 3088, which, again, believe me, as a fiscal committee, we support that formula and the fact that we should be funding those things. So we would have to look at a way to do that. Maybe that's an area where we cover somewhere, okay? But separated from the operating expense. So I think that's enough numbers, okay? But the concept being, let's look at a forecast and really think about where we are. Nobody in the fiscal committee is out to slash and burn or anything else. That's not the intention of anyone, okay? It's where do we think we can be and ought to be, okay, to do the job right.
Thank you, David. And I think what I heard loud and clear was, we've talked a lot about budgets. Budget last year, budget this year. But the key data point that the fiscal committee would really like to see is, as best they can, a proper year-end forecast on both revenues and expenses so that is the baseline from which the next year's budget is done from, not a budget that's a year old. And I guess I turn to Larry and say, obviously there's been a lot of turnover in the finance department, but that is a key thing in budgeting. And what are your thoughts in terms of, deep breath, new controller, et cetera? Where are we at in terms of, gosh, yeah, we're seeing our monthly actuals versus budget, and we're going to project where we're going to be on December 31st. How close are you to being able to do something like that?
We will have that. We will start that with the July actuals, which David Honeywell, our assistant controller, and Tom Deal, our new controller, actually we were talking about that earlier today. Obviously, they're having to learn quite a bit of some of the complex spreadsheets that the prior CFO and controller had set up. They've gotten through those. We're waiting for one statement, actually.
Excuse me, Larry, I'm sorry. We're not aware of a controller.
Started.
So I'll if it's all right. I mean, so BG
yes,
left several weeks ago. Melissa, can you tell me a date? Do you remember off the top of your head, or? So BG's left RA.
Yeah, did she not announce that at the meeting?
I thought I mentioned, yeah. So
I've sent her emails and haven't gotten answers.
Well, now you know.
Now you know why, exactly. So VG left RA earlier in this
She
month.
let us know
Yeah.
she was going.
Yeah.
She did. Larry let us know that was happening on the board. So apologies. It was no secret. So she left. There was some good handover time. She gave proper handover time, and now Larry and team have hired a new controller, and his name is
Tom Deal,
Okay,
and he
Deal.
started a week ago today.
excellent.
And so ramping up, and so we're small. Sometimes, as you know, at RA, we take a slight step back, and then we bounce right back and take a couple steps forward. So that's what's happening currently. So Larry's building back for some of these year-end forecasts. Is trying to do some training and working through with the team to get there.
So we
That's why Robert came back, right? To
Right. He
help
was
do some-
giving us a little tutorial on some of the complexities. That was last Wednesday night. So we should have August, and I know I don't have August financials right now. I mean, July financials. So we're going to use that, though, to start our projections. We're going to be talking about this at our senior leadership team meeting on Wednesday, because I know it is important. And, and we're accustomed to it. Last 2 or 3 years, Robert said, hey, we got to start doing a year-end projections. We get that. But we've been in a little bit, sort of little restructuring here. And so I apologize, but we will get those out as soon as possible. Duly noted.
So that's key. Thank you, Larry, and appreciate it. Again, apologies for certainly there were no secrets on that. It just didn't get communicated to the team as quickly as it should have done. Before we start an open discussion to talk about some of these tools and other things, I'd like to give some time for our esteemed treasurer to make any comments. So Eric is on the phone, our board treasurer. Eric, we've had Larry kind of give a presentation and talk through some tools. Now David and Ben and the Fiscal Committee have, talked us through, again, some tools and again, the essential point of a proper year-end forecast around this time of year to build the budget upon. So we've talked through those things. So now, if you could give us any thoughts you've had as thank you so much for joining us on your vacation, and just make sure that margarita's raised as the first, as you start chatting.
So the first thing is kudos to the Fiscal Committee for rolling up their sleeves and taking a look at our budget, the first draft. A couple of broad thoughts about our process here, and then some atmospheric thoughts. If everybody remembers, we go through 3 drafts of this budget, right? And the first draft is sort of a pro forma, right? It's take the last year's budget, add the things we know we have to do, or we think we have to do, and then present that. That's a straw man that we get to all beat up. And I'm pleased to see that we're all beating it up, and we're kind of putting it through its paces. The task now is it becomes, for the board, right? And take Dave's thoughts, with some seriousness and give them some thoughts. We have a lot of tools for this year's budget, and for every year's budget, obviously. But it really is incumbent upon us to use these tools not just as a let's get to a number, but use these tools as a setting a fiscal direction for the association. Sort of atmospheric thought, stepping back, and that there's a couple things that I think as we go into the next real budget cycle that we're going to want to think about as a board. The first is that we're pretty conservative in our budget. Each year we seem to come down with a possibility left over. That's okay, but we do tend to have fat budgets, as evidenced by the fact that 2 years ago we had $4 million in excess cash, and we were able to pay off an entire lake house loan with that and not really sweat it. Do we need to run leaner budgets? And I don't have an answer for that, but I want to put that in everybody's mind. The second is the biennial budget process. I don't want to get into that a lot now. I have some thoughts that we'll talk about next year. The is the biennial budget process really serving us? Because we're spending so much time in the off year retooling the budget that we already have. It may make more sense to go to a more streamlined annual process where we can kind of feed these things in. The other thing that we need to think about is the assumptions we've made when we look at this budget. Draft one comes to us, and as I said, by definition, this is last year's budget plus what the staff thinks it has to do, the must-do. We're long overdue for something like a zero-based review, right, or kind of a build-up from the ground up. And I'm not recommending it this year, but I want the Fiscal Committee and I want the board to be thinking, both groups, I want them to be thinking in terms of that. As we look at this process next year, think about some holistic ways we might be able to tackle this differently. And that's about it. Thanks.
No, makes sense. Good high-level thoughts for us and direction for us to follow. Melissa, I want to maybe put you on the spot for a second, because Sherry sent a note. She wasn't able to join us today, but she sent a note that you and she embarked on just some HR-related structuring last year that would roll out over several years. And we noticed certainly in Larry's presentation, again, sorry for putting you on the spot, but there were some HR increases for like the medical health expenses for the insurance and things. Has the thoughts that you and Sherry were working through last year been incorporated with Larry, or is that does that need some more discussion between Sherry, yourself, Larry, the board, or is that pretty vetted at this stage? If that's okay, I'm sorry to pull you, unexpected out, but I just know that Sherry had sent us a note, and I wanted just to make sure we included that discussion.
So the note that she sent earlier, so just the nuance is, we had talked last year about moving the employee share of health insurance costs up over time. So what we did last year is we moved the employee-only share from 5 to 10%, and then dependents remained at 15%, and they've been that way. So the thought was potentially to move again this year and have the employee-only share be 15% to match the dependent, which is 15%. So that's not folded into draft one. Larry and I did have some discussion about it. I think we didn't immediately fold it in because we do have some concerns at this point about retention of staff, not just attracting staff. So it's not reflected. It easily can be, so we can give you a picture of what that would look like. But just so you know, it's just on the employee-only coverage that we would make movement. That was the potential, is to move it so that dependents and employee-only share would be 15% across. The other point that she made within that email was a discussion about that merit allowance, 100,000 line. We knew going into the year that about half of that was already earmarked for some market adjustments, some equity adjustments internally. It's not been fully spent. We had some other more recent expenditures that we did talk to board officers about, some retention bonuses, but there are dollars left in that fund for this year.
And I'm certainly used to just, from the business world, budgeting on a percentage, not that it's a straight line percentage that the entire team gets, but you budget on a percentage and then it's distributed based upon performance. So it's a way to get what that bucket looks like. So I just, again, I don't want to go into details tonight, but I do, Sherry brought that up to the attention of the board, that there was a process begun last year, and there are no final answers on that, but I think the board, since we did hear from Sherry that was the board had embarked with you on a process last year, would probably like to see recommendations of what that should happen.
And if I can just real quick, so what we did last year, we went to an annual review process. So everybody is reviewed at the same time. We crunch it out, towards the end of the year. What it did, we basically sat down with the managers, department heads, managers, supervisors, everybody. And so if you have had a large team working for you, like Mike's a perfect example, you've got a lot of the maintenance staff and so forth. The supervisors that work under Mike brought all their folks in. And so it was really a kind of a side-by-side comparison. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is when you have your folks coming in, like one after the other, and then as a group, you really get a sense, a much clearer picture, frankly, of who those good performers are, why they're good performers, and so forth. But what the net result of that is that the overall score and the merit increase for the staff actually went down, I think, 0.3 percentage point. So what we have actually incorporated into the budget, which I think I was narrated at the Fiscal Committee originally, was 2.3%.
To create the bucket.
Right. So, so we do not have a COLA, and it is pay for performance based on a new annual review system, and the average that's been incorporated is 2.3%, not 3%. So just
We did a pretty strong, within draft one is an analysis line by line of kind of historic, what happened last year for a person, what kind of performer have they been to date, but based on last year's performance scores, because we felt like they were a more accurate reflection of actually pay for performance, that we're being more constructive in our feedback. So I do feel like we're headed in the right direction.
Perfect.
In a pretty good clip there.
Okay, and I don't want to go into any more detail than that tonight, but I did want to make sure that we referenced one of the directors who could not be here thoughts on this, and that it was in her mind a multi-year approach to the issue. So we should probably make sure there's a good discussion and in coming into the next draft to make sure that the recommendation from you and Larry is discussed and clear to us, and so we move forward with it. So thank you for letting me call you up there. All right, so we've heard from Larry, the staff presentation. We've heard from David and Ben on the fiscal presentation. We've heard from our treasurer, Eric. We pressed a little bit on Melissa with some notes that Sherry, a director who couldn't be here, wanted us to make sure we thought through. Before we get to open discussion and we press on any of these points a little further, does anyone have any further data inputs that they're like, hey, you forgot to do X? Help me with any X's that we forgot. Mark.
The only thing is I just want to clarify two disparate discussions here that actually reflect almost the same number. I just wanted to point it out. Larry, you were mentioning possibly looking at the operating reserve for $240,000. If you look at the building budget sheet that's currently up on the screen, and you can actually see that number. If you look at the 197, it's showing up in capital right now, which isn't it's not necessarily capital. That's actually because the capital is funded separately.
First half delta, is that what you're saying?
The first half delta, if the net first half delta is 197, and we were forecasting as a committee 42 for the second half, the total of which is 235, which is essentially what Larry mentioned completely independently before. So what it means is that whatever we're achieving out of the operating reserve this year is because we've under budgeted. We've performed better than budget this year, but there may be more room to scrub in the operating reserve or not, but we're not actually scrubbing it any harder than we did in prior years. So that's certainly a point that I'm sure our committee will be looking at hard for the second. What is the minimum that we need there? But it's something that you guys should be focused on as well.
Okay, thank you. Other things before we start discussion? I just want to sort of pare it back then. When I heard the main points coming out of the discussion was there's a delta. We're going into 2019 with kind of a $200K less in revenue that was in the budget because we're not going to get it as Larry described, and $200K more in expense because the reduction didn't happen. So we're going into that 2019 period with a 400K delta just with stuff we know it's not going to happen in the second half. We just know it today. It's not going to happen. So you've got that. We know that tools we have are assessments. Assessments are our main revenue stream, so that's a tool. We know that expense reduction is a tool, so we've got that. We've got something I want to explore further with the Finance Department and Fiscal Committee is that investment income, because back in that 2013-14 period, we did a resolution that the minimum balance of the repair replacement fund should be invested more aggressively. And is there a chance to capture some of that investment gain in this? Maybe you'll say yes, or maybe it's not, but it's a potential tool to try and help balance a budget. We've talked about the operating reserve, and that over time, if you do better in revenue and better by spending less in expense, that operating reserve can grow, and we need to make sure it's at a proper level and that forecast at the end of the year, so we can use that to squish it down and use some of that money, like was done for Tetra and other things, to help balance a budget and buy new software and things that is needed for the association. So we've talked about those tools. We've talked about the importance of a year-end forecast that is more important than the budget that was there, to know where you're really going to end with your actuals, and we talked about the key there, and David just brought it up, and Larry's helped us understand, that that's coming together. Those are the main points and the main tools I heard. So I'd like now to pepper each other with some questions about where do we go from here, and what more data do we need, etc. So let's open it up to the floor.
I have one easy question.
Okay, Karen?
It goes back to the staff presentation. Just unrealized revenue. Where would one find the information, the details on the facility sponsorship and proper commitments that did not happen yet?
I will turn to Mr. Leone for that one. The question about the facility sponsorship piece. I know that there was some initial information developed on that, but that was put in the budget based upon relationships of staff who are no longer working here.
Okay.
That's a key element of it.
Okay.
And that's not to say that people here couldn't go out and develop those relationships, but they take a little time.
Okay. Thanks. And proper commitments that will be coming?
Some of that. We will fall short in total on that. But we should, I'm hopeful that by the end of the year, we'll be close to 80,000 on that.
And
with the balance, some of that balance coming in 2019.
Okay. And where does one get the details on that? From whom and all of that?
Right now, it's contractually based with the developers. I would say that's executive session material.
So,
okay.
But the public session material could be such that you are looking at it with the finance staff, and you will be doing some kind of year-end projection of, as maybe if money is due as condos are sold or something like that, right. You will do some kind of projection to say the number of assessment units will be X by the end of the year, and this will be the number in 2019, and that's kind of will be fed, and that's like a number that Karen can see. Is that true?
Yes, but each of those, as actually I think this is probably before you got on the board, each of those discussions with the development community have been done in executive session.
Right.
And
so, fine, and that's fine. But the number of units that you will project, that will be part of that budget to do assessment.
Absolutely.
I think that was one of your questions. How do I get the detail on if it's 21,000? I'm making this number up. 21,000 this year and 21,500 next year. Who tells us that? And Larry, you will have that information.
But her question was on proffers.
Yeah, what I was wanting to know is where is the information on who the proffers are coming from? And I understand that's
right. And so that the proper is a little bit of a misnomer in this, because when, be careful what I say here. For instance, when we were just, working with Sika's Homes, there was a specific set of terms for his joining into the association that the board was fully informed about. And so that was codified then in an MOU, and will be part of the supplementary declaration ultimately, which it actually won't be part of that, but it subjects the property to the covenants and so forth. Each of those discussions with the developers has been done, with developer X and Y and Z. And it is, yes, it is a contractual discussion.
Thanks.
So certainly not to say details, because it's part of a negotiated contract, but the generality of after those are done and a projection of how much will affect the budget will be something that you'll be able over the next months to help understand the detail for.
Yes.
At a high level, not specific
Absolutely.
units.
Thank you. Broader question, just throwing it out. So I heard both Mark and David talk about us needing to be careful not to be overcharging our members. And Eric mentioned too in his comments about one of the things that we might want to think about is a leaner budget. So I guess what I'm asking is, obviously we had a decrease in the assessment last year, which may have been a result of feeling that we were overcharging members.
Subsidized it from some of those reserves.
So I guess, and I don't know, maybe this is a question for Tony also. What are our obligations in terms of, if we're finding ourselves with money left over every year, is there a legal obligation to at some point give money back to the membership?
Is there a legal obligation to give money back to the membership? That's a very layered question, because there are manners, such as what the Fiscal Committee said, when you're in essence giving back money to the membership by buying down the assessment. Bottom line, what the job of the board is the fiduciary obligation. Watch the money. You don't want to overcharge your members, but at the same time, you don't want to put yourself in such a situation where you have to do a special assessment or something else that hits people unexpectedly and creates more strife. It's really not a legal question so much as, as long as the money is being gathered in accordance with our governing instruments and the statute and being utilized for the purposes of our association, and is not, I don't want to say past the laugh test, but it doesn't exceed the bounds of reasonableness, I think you're on firm legal ground.
Well, and I guess I'd just like to chime in that, again, to me, use of the operating reserve is one of the tools. It may be a tool, if it gets large enough, it can be the sole tool, and say, I can balance the budget with that. But that's what I'm looking to. Obviously, it paid, as Ben said, it paid for paying off the lake house loan at one point. And so the determination of staff and the Fiscal Committee at that point must have been, there's enough money in there to use that to pay it off, and so what I'd love to see as part of the next month to go around is the Finance Department and the Fiscal Committee project where that operating fund is going to be at year end and say, hey, I probably have about 200 grand in there we can use, or 500 grand, or $8.62, or whatever it would be, as the best we can do to say, how much of that tool can we use? And again, if it gets too large, if it's the right size, you feel like it is a reasonable pot to use for the unknowns. If it gets too large, then we've charged too much, and we need to get it back into the members' hands, is the point that was made, and I think we can all agree to that. We just need to make sure we understand what that number is. Julie?
So I'm I'm not a fan of having a whole lot of excess cash. I've asked that question before in my other years about why did I have so much at the end. But I'm also concerned that I know that the reserve studies we've done in the past have not been as thorough as we've needed them to be, and we've come up with a couple surprises in my years on the board on not projecting enough. So I do think that the recommendation that we reevaluate how we do our formula in concert with the reserve study, and maybe that, maybe there's a shortfall there that we have to perhaps take some of that excess cash to try to shore that up. I don't know. I recall on my first go-round on the biannual budget that we spent hours, days, that seemed to me kind of like a zero-based funding approach where each activity was $1 per, or 50 cents if we add this into the budget. So we might, Eric, I know you weren't on the board then, but maybe, we can just kind of look at how that had been done before and see if that, it was very painful, but I don't disagree that we ought to always filter that. I am looking at the fiscal's recommendations of the proposed 2019 assessment of 15,125 versus the current draft of 15,965, which is why I was asking the question of how many households did we have in 2018? How many are we projecting in 2019? Where are they coming from? That delta, that change. I don't want to be in a position where we, like we found ourselves this year, where we budgeted for a decrease in our headquarters rental and then found it not realized mid-year. I was not aware we had done that. I do tend to budget conservatively, so I would not have personally put that in there. I would have assumed it wasn't going to change and hoped that I could have executed a savings. So I'm particularly interested in that, getting more attuned to the revenue number in household changes. I know that there were some agreements that we made, like with Comstock's apartments, and going to condos, but I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon. If anything, we see more and more apartments going up than condos. I do think we ought to put more exploration into, and we've done this before, in looking at what kind of packages can we offer non-members to be able to use our facilities. I know there's a lot of school kids who find they can't play with their playmates because they aren't members, and with the increase of population in the corridor where they're not, or over at the town center, the families are occupying those units. It's just not no kids, couples. So those are a couple thoughts I had on what's been presented thus far.
Can we come back to you? Ben has his hand up.
Sure.
Okay, Ben?
I was just trying to get an idea of, we have about 5 minutes left for this working session before we move on to other topics. And as per the schedule, we had said that today we will give some guidance to staff towards draft 2 of the budget. So are we going to be able to do that? And if so, in what manner? Is the question.
As the liaison to the Fiscal Committee, we're open to your suggestion.
Volley back to you, then.
So if I may suggest, I think we can start with the list that Larry provided of the potential strategies for going from draft 1 to draft 2. But if we could get a couple of different versions of draft 2. So to the best of what you think you could further aggressively cut down on that 2.5% increase by comfortably perhaps taking more from the investment earnings, perhaps taking more from the operational reserve, looking at how you have cut expenses, and to come with a couple of different versions and present it to us, so then we can look at it, and I think your comfort and the finance department's comfort is important over here, but at the same time, try to be a little more aggressive in some of these items that don't seem to impact us, like if you were to dip a little more into the operational reserves or the investment earnings, and come back to us, and then we can take a look at that and further go from there, if that's okay with everybody.
I think that's a great idea, and I think we'd all around the table agree, and I think we've said it in different forms, that our first druthers is, let's study that operating reserve and the year-end forecast. If there's enough money in there, that's a tool we like to use before we would raise assessments. Let's take a look at that investment income. If that investment income is, we can capture some of the gains we've made out of there in a reasonable way, I think we'd like to use that before we worried about assessments. I think Larry's offered up to work with his team to look at a 2.5% expense reduction by department, non-people related, and I think we'd like to have him continue looking at that tool. And then finally, the tool we'd like to use as a last resource, as you described, is the change in assessments. But those are tools that we have, and I believe your point's well taken, that we'd like to see. Larry did a case study, and maybe, Larry, is this a good time for you to go over the page that you handed out as one potential case study of how you balanced it? But I think Ben's saying maybe we'd like to see a few more of these with, as you learn more about investment, capturing investment gains. Let's put that number in there and see what the other numbers have to be, things like that.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
When you create those versions, perhaps you can create one version with a 0 assessment increase, if you're able to. And perhaps that will allow us to look at how viable or how not viable that is. Because when you put that, we'll see that there are going to be some perhaps dramatic cuts that are just not feasible. But if you can do that just as a version of the draft for us to look at, I think that'll be a helpful tool. And then we can look at those 2 or 3 different versions, whatever you produce, and reach for a good draft to somewhere in between.
So essentially, the spreadsheet that we were working on, starts with that. In other words, we work into it by looking at what's the current assessment, calculating that through, and then that actually, lack of a more highly technical term, spits out the fact that the $39 is the increase that would be needed. So we already have the base to that of having it with no assessment increase. So that part should be easy. So what then becomes more difficult is what are the various elements? I mean, it kind of becomes horse trading, quite frankly, and without doing any speculative forecasting on non-assessment revenues or things like that, it really just becomes kind of what do you want to keep and what do you.
And we did some of that in when we came up with the 2018 when the biannual. I mean, I remember us discussing, do we put mowing in? How many mowings of the some of the streets and whatever. And I think we had done pretty much paring down in 2018, other than perhaps some assumptions that we made that were not founded.
I'm going to go. Okay. Go ahead, Ben. Yeah.
Once you reach that point where you're not getting anywhere from just moving things around, that's when you use these tools that we talked about to try and see what you can do over there. Then advises whether by using those tools, whether how comfortable and how viable or not it is.
Right, and so so this, I think that everybody has a sheet in front of them.
This one.
Yeah, so this was just a hypothetical layout based upon and I had this on the screen earlier, but it sort of gives you a feel for, and this is just one approach. So if you look at, that, again, using the 682 is the base in all these calculations to do what we've projected both on the expense and then also what we anticipate the revenue from 682 and non-assessment revenues, that's the $39 difference that I spoke to earlier. And so these are, this is
Can I stop
just,
you there too?
yeah.
That $39, it's key back to David now, because that $39 is based on budget to budget. And if David's saying, you look at that number, a year-end forecast, and that 39 might turn into 36 or 30 or 300, God forbid.
Right.
But I mean,
Right.
that's part of the year-end forecast that David was talking about earlier. So I agree with the $39 out of the technical term, got spit out.
from
But-
draft,
But
from the
from
draft
budget,
one calculation.
from budget to budget. But I think that other way, that other angle to look at, from the year end, forecast is maybe that $39, because the expense is different than the budget, or the revenue is different than the budget, we're starting at a different number. So
Right, so this is based upon what we knew at the time this was put together.
Yep, so I just wanted to stop you that one other delta is the 39 is not solid until you do the year-end forecast.
Right. So, all other things being equal, hypothetically, this is one way that you could apply these tools. And so on that sheet, again, just based on the 39, because that was the early calculation, going up from the 682, a 2.5% possible increase in the assessment of 17, brings it to 699. So the delta then between what we projected as required for draft one and the 2019 base, and I'm talking the 2019 base being that 699 after the 2.5% increase, then we look at 2.5% decrease from the draft one to draft two OpEx expenses. So that takes it down another 10, which leaves a delta of 12. And it's that 12, and again, just in this example sheet, of pulling approximately $240,000 from the operating reserves for that piece. So again, this can be mixed and matched a number of different ways.
Right.
And as we get into the projections here in the next month, and we learn more about where we're going to end up, I want to learn more about some of the investments as well. This will all become clear, but this was just one way to look at some of the tools that are available.
And I think what Ben is saying is, as you learn more real data points, a couple different case studies of one, holding assessments down, using the other three tools. One, using a small assessment increase and using other tools. It's just different real studies. Is that one thing you said?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Right.
And Mark, I'm going to do you, and then over to John,
Right.
who's been suspiciously quiet here. So, Mark?
I'd like to slightly tilt that analysis if I can try. There's three basic things that we can look at this year. There's the revenue assessments, there's the operating reserves, and then there's the operating costs. Okay, and two of the three of those are relatively straightforward, although we might not know the answers to them today. The operating reserve, whatever the number is that we can pull, will fall out and become obvious as we study it more aggressively. But at some point, it's going to be obvious what we can take and what we can't. We're going to figure out what that is. But it's not really going to be that arbitrary, probably, when we come up with it.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not.
What it is.
Hopefully not.
We want your team's advice on what we can confidently take out of it.
Absolutely. And likewise, once we figured out what our expenses are and our operating reserve adjustments might be, whatever's left has to be a change in the actual assessment. Because we have to fill any hole that we might have in the budget. But in the meantime, we've got this middle component, the operating expenses, that we really need to understand, and what can we do with that? And that's the part where, certainly, as a fiscal committee member, I have the least comfort in terms of my own knowledge of it. I mean, I can pretty much calculate what will happen to the assessment if I add 2.5% or add 1% or whatever number. I can figure out how to close that hole. But what I really don't have a good feel for is what happens in the operating expense budget when we make changes. And so, sort of along the lines of what Ben was requesting, I'd like to see it where we look at expense reductions of $10, like you're showing in the case study, maybe $20, maybe $30, maybe 39 or 40, like every $10, what would that do to the organization to get to that number, okay? Because ultimately, that's what's going to drive the board's decisions as to how much pain can the staff accept without decimating the organization or the community. And maybe it can't take any reduction. Or maybe it's $40. It's probably not either of those. But without being able to actually see how much pain are we inflicting on the organization and on the community, we can't really figure out what we should be spending.
I mean, that's certainly a way to look at it, and what you're asking for makes some sense. It's probably hard to really get that crystal clear answer. But I think another way of saying it again is, assessments would be our least favorite way of raising, balancing a budget. So we want to understand operating reserve, investment income, expense reduction first, and then, filling the hole with whatever that would have to be with assessment. So, John. Thank you, Mark.
So I almost I was almost going to be silent, but I want to say this first, and people say this to be polite or something, I guess. I disagree with nothing I've heard tonight. In fact, I'm impressed with what the Fiscal Committee has come up with your presentation. I want to say, Ven and I shared a few emails today, and both of us, it seems, have been tracking it for a couple of years, both the rate of increase in our assessment rates here in RA and in how that compares with CPIU, Consumer Price Index urban figures. And I agree, it's nearly, our rates have been nearly double that of the CPIU over the since 2000. And I'm concerned about that. But I want to put another word out to focus on, and that's the services and benefits that we present to our members. Our goal and our job is not to not spend money. In my 25 years of doing or helping do municipal budgets, one of the gravest errors I've encountered is people dealing with budgets as disembodied numbers. In other words, disconnected from the services and the people those services help. So the trick is not to be cheap. Our goal is value. Our goal is value for our members. And I'm saying what we all know, but I just wanted to say it.
Yes.
And this is why, by the way, we need desperately to have member input, because we need to know what is valuable for our members. Otherwise, we can't do real budgeting. We can shift numbers around. We can cut costs, but we're not necessarily providing values if we don't know what our members need. So what is value? Value is benefit over cost. And so how do you increase value? Well, you increase the benefit or you decrease the cost. How do you decrease the cost? Efficiency. We must always seek more efficient ways to do things. In terms of increasing value, we need to have a hierarchy of benefits. Some things are more valuable to more people than others, but we also need to see what's valuable for people who may have different needs and rarely get them met. So it's a difficult task, that fair distribution of benefits. So value is the big thing. The other two principles I've seen in budgeting that are critical are affordability. Is it affordable for the organization? And is it available for the citizens or members of that organization? So we may say, yeah, Reston Association can pay for it, but we need to think about the affordability for the wide spectrum of our members. And finally, fairness. I alluded to this earlier. We need to make sure that it's not simply the most vocal people whose whose needs and interests get attended to. And it's very hard if people don't speak up. But we need to have a fair distribution of benefits. So what I'm doing, again, is saying, I agree with all this. And I like the suggestions of taking these various tools to make the budget, make the expenditures and the revenues fit. Totally agree, and I look forward to seeing various scenarios. But we need to keep in mind that what we're about is not costs, but value. And that means services for our members.
Makes good sense. I think we've got marching orders for what we've asked the two committees, or the Finance Department and Larry and Fiscal Committee to do. I want to do one more thing after Julie says something.
Listening sessions.
What's that?
The listening sessions. We want member input. I think now's a good time, especially after what John shared with us, which I would have applauded, clapping for what you shared. But we have listening sessions scheduled in this schedule you gave us.
Starting in September.
And they're in each of the districts. And I want to see people come. I want to see and hear from people because it is about service. It is about, and we made a lot of those choices last year in 2018 when we were looking at the budget, and in the time before that, what if we take this away? What's it going to cost? And is that worth a 50-cent reduction or not? So
I think the way John's described, again, we want to hear what
we do.
Everyone values, and it's an equation.
Right.
It's the benefits or services over the costs, and there's different ways to increase the value, right, as John described. And we need to hear from people because it's subjective. It's different for everyone, how you increase value. If you'll indulge me, let's just close this with, what are the purposes of our association? To interpret, administer, and enforce the protective covenants. Thank you, Anna. You're still in here? She's not. Protective covenants and restrictions of this deed in such a manner as to conserve, protect, and enhance the value of all real property subject to the deed. For the benefit of the members, to acquire, own, sell, mortgage, convey, encumber, and lease property, real or personal, and to improve, administer, and maintain such property in neat and good order, provided, however, that the recreational facilities of the association and other common areas shall be intended for the use and benefit primarily of the members. What are our services in that? What do we describe as our services? Design, use, maintenance standards within the community, planning, development, maintenance of the parkland and facilities, maintenance of certain aspects of Reston's roads, providing recreational programs and services, neighborhood outreach, education, and leadership development for neighborhood association officers, communications and community engagement, advocacy on issues that affect Reston, design review, develop and administer design guidelines for the community and individual associations, maintain aesthetic quality of exteriors, landscapes, etc. Covenants, there's Anna, there she's back. Covenants, develop and enforce maintenance standards for properties to protect property values and enhance the built environment. Different amenities we have are the 1,300 acres of land in over 375 parcels, 4 lakes, 55 miles of pathways, 8 miles of natural surface trails, 115 bridges, 25 underpasses, 378 lights, 15 outdoor pools, including a 50-meter pool, 52 outdoor tennis courts, 26 lighted, and 8 clay, and I can't read that farther bit, 30 multi-purpose courts, and there's more, the nature center, the lake house, picnic pavilions. Those are all things that we all own 1/21,000th of, ish. And no one else is going to keep those up for us. The county, the state, the federal government, it's us. So obviously those are things we've got to do. So that's part of that value. With that, David wants to say one last thing.
Very quick, Andy. Is there any way in the next month that we can communicate with folks who are working on this? Our dilemma is we meet once a month, okay? Staff works on this every day, okay? So we don't participate in this, and we're going to, it might be helpful if somehow email something, maybe it's not possible.
I look to Larry for that.
Yeah, no, we can certainly.
If there's some way where we could actually, provide something or get something and maybe help that process and not wait till the end of September to look at it again.
I was concerned, I looked at the schedule, and it has fiscal committee meeting like 3 days before the board.
Right.
And I was thinking it would be nice to be able to get some insight from your thoughts rather than.
Well, and I was thinking just that with the new staff, it's probably more important than ever to have, hey, I worked this through. I need a second set of eyes to kind of help me with this, with some people who have been thinking about this. And
Sure,
if
yeah.
that is possible, that may be a really good possibility.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that will have to be done well in advance of not only the fiscal committee meeting in September, but the board meeting. So when we get to those sort of benchmarks, one will be our first crack at the year-end expenses, and projections and so forth. I think maybe the thing to do would be to share that with the fiscal committee, and we can talk offline about how best that is presented and so forth. Typically, we would show that on a department line, 1,100, 1,200, and so forth, where we expect to be revenues and expenses at the high level.
No.
So can we look to you, Larry, to work with Eric and the committee just to, if there is a good point in between this next fiscal committee meeting and when the finance department has, hey, we could really use a second set of eyes on something now to talk this through, that may be a very useful thing, especially in this year of change. With that, I'd like to, unless we haven't had any comment from some, anything anyone wants to share before we close this?
The only thing that I'd like to recommend is when we take a look at the budget to forecast for the remainder of the year, to also consider those one-off type expenses, like the vacancy of the CEO. That's a pretty significant salary. That's a one-time thing that we may not be looking at correctly to say, we only spent $1,000 this year. Well, maybe we really should have spent $1,100, and we need to carry that forward to really see what our baseline is.
So be careful on year-end projections, makes sense.
Yeah, to help normalize.
Normalize it, thank you.
Yeah, normalize either any revenues or expenses. I think some of the other things too, though, to take into account, was said early on, and more of a keep it simple when possible. And one thing that did change that was the rent or the lease for Reston. I mean, it was said that one of the primary drivers for why assessments went down by $10 is because there's going to be that savings. Well, if that's not there, that should be pretty quick, I think, to just make that adjustment back, because it's easy to explain. Everybody can get on board. When you start talking about all these other expenses and everything else, it can muddy the waters. I'm not saying don't do the work. I'm not saying let's not look at it several different ways, but what you want is to be able to tell the story from beginning to end and be very clear about it. And that was one that just stood out to me as, okay, that we can all kind of get behind. Nobody's happy about it, obviously.
Right, and so, yeah, that's a good point. Draft one includes us paying that.
Right.
So, yeah, we try, I'm sure there's a couple that, I don't want to say we've missed any, but, each version that we go through, the staff that develops the budget, as well as the finance staff and I, literally go line by line, and there's thousands of line items in various department budgets, and it's looking for those specific things that, did we miss something? This should be X or Y. So, yeah, so we do that. That's a good
Your
point.
point is so well taken. I mean, again, our job is to understand the detail very closely, such that we then can state very simply and at a high level the story of what's going on.
Right.
But we can only do that accurately if we understand this detail first. So your point is very well taken. But we haven't finished our job until we are able to state it at a high level in a way that people who don't have to learn all the details can understand.
Correct.
Yep, thank you. Anything else? With that, we're going to close that agenda item, and the board will not feel slighted if the fiscal committee runs for the door. But if you want to stay, you are welcome to do so. But I would advise anyone not to be too close to the door, or you might get knocked down, or there may be a footprint on your back. Steppa, what size shoe do you wear? I want to know in case I'm and your footprint is on my back.
Thanks so much for your good work.
Yeah,
Excellent
thank
work, guys.
you.
Thank you. Guys.
Thank you all.
Much appreciated.
Thanks for coming in, everybody. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your time and patience, and I know we're a little long on that. With that, we're going to move to the next agenda item, which is the Reston Association letter to Fairfax County on the small work group sessions and the PRC ordinance. Just to disclose, we did get that letter in our email midweek, and we have had a chance to look at it and make any comments. Is it one page that you've handed? Yeah. So we have seen that before, and at this point tonight, the goal is to ratify that letter to send, and I know we have some small wordsmithing and changes that we want to add to that. So Larry, can I have you maybe just talk us through the high level, and then I think John has a quick amendment that we're going to do. A motion with an amendment, but maybe you could open the topic and just...
Yeah, so we, as most people know, in November last year, the county proposed changing the PRC zoning ordinance and increasing the density cap that's been in place for a long, long time, which is currently 13, and they proposed moving it up to 16. A lot of huge amount of community discussion around this, and which culminated at the end of 2017. Reston Association submitted a letter with some very specific requests to the county. In addition, the Coalition for Planned Reston did the same. And one of the main results of those letters and our requests was to set up a series of what we called small group meetings to talk about specific topic areas that were under discussion. And a lot of those topic areas didn't really actually talk about the PRC zoning ordinance itself. It talked about the backbone to that, which is the comprehensive plan that's driving a lot of that. So we had, I think Mr. Lovis commented on these earlier, we had some really great discussions with the county on transportation, schools, parks and recreation, and some general planning principles. But there's still a lot of questions and a lot of unanswered requests for information out there. So the letter that, and I want to give credit where credit is due, Kelsey put that piece together, and I think she did a great job of capturing the essence of what was agreed upon, even if those agreements were just what are the next steps or what is the information that we still need, as well as those areas where there's still not agreement. And I would say that it's pretty consistent with what CPR has submitted as well, and is going to be submitting based upon those individual meetings.
The latest version.
Pardon?
Where's the latest version of the letter?
It was in the packet.
It was in your packet.
Okay, it was.
In the packet, and then
we have
we're
John.
gonna have
Okay,
it.
I just
And then
wanted to make sure that's
I've
where
added
I
one
would
thing
find
to
it.
it as well. So.
Okay.
And so just my final point is that, so what we've done is crafted a letter to go back to Supervisor Hudgens and the county staff that reflects what, again, where areas where we agree, information that we still want to get as part of this whole discussion, and some areas where we frankly don't necessarily agree. And so that is what is before you this evening.
And further collaboration that we seek.
Correct.
So, and as certainly outcomes that we believe happened and actions that are still needed. Mm-hmm. And I think the letter describes both of those.
Correct.
I don't know if I explicitly said this at the beginning of the meeting, since we are going to take a vote. We do have quorum because there are 6 of us here. One of us is on the phone, but we do have a quorum here, and I just want to state that explicitly, even though we have 6 board members here, missing 3. So if we are going to take a vote, we have quorum to do so.
Would you entertain a motion, Mr. President?
Certainly.
Mr. President, I move that the board approve the letter which the board has received in draft form dated August 20th to Supervisor Hudgens with the following changes. First, on our point 1, Reston Association's point 1, as it's called in the letter, discussed on page 1, and then again on page 7, changing from the current version, which begins as discussed at the July 30th meeting and ends with the words, once an agreement is met, changing that to the following. As discussed at the July 30th meeting, RA appreciates the commitment from Fairfax County Planning and Zoning staff to work on inserting a population target back into the comprehensive plan and the corresponding Reston land use map. However, the RA Board of Directors continues to believe strongly that an overall population cap, not just a target, is needed and appropriate, and urges the county to make that change. RA looks forward to coordinating with Fairfax County staff and the community on the methodology of establishing the cap and initiating an amendment to the plan once an agreement is met. Second change, add a new paragraph at the end of the current RA comment, which we've just been through. And that new paragraph would say, RA wholeheartedly accepts the invitation of Fairfax County Director of Planning and Zoning, Fred Selden, to collaborate with the county on a methodologically sound estimate of Reston's present-day population of Reston. There are some repetitions here that didn't get stricken by me. Given that the existing competing methodologies create confusion. And finally, third change, RA.8 discussed on page 5, which currently says RA's position is that there was never appropriate public comment before the county's inclusion of this road in the map. Changed that to RA's position is that there was no public comment time before the county's inclusion of this road in the plan.
Yes.
So, and
How
just
did
as
you
everyone
change
gets,
B? Yeah.
and B, that was, there's a, right before the paragraph in the last sentence, there's a of Reston. I think we just eliminate the of Reston.
Right.
So just scratch the of Reston. Larry, do you see that?
Is this in
B?
And also, invitation
Is in there
is
twice, yeah.
duplicated there. So the invitation of Fred Selden, invitation 2. So invitation 2 should be stricken.
So
Yep.
in B,
Or
we
two.
strike invitation 2 right before.
Invitation, and then it should read to collaborate.
To collaborate. So get rid of the second invitation. And
So
to
it would
collaborate
say,
stay.
RA wholeheartedly accepts the invitation of Fairfax County Director of Planning and Zoning, Fred Selden.
No, Fairfax County Director of Planning and Zoning, Fred
It's-
Selden.
It's his title. So,
Okay.
To collaborate.
Yeah.
yeah, to
Fred
collaborate.
Selden's to collaborate. That, wait, that didn't make sense.
Right, so
Yeah.
accepts the invitation of Fred Selden, Fairfax County Director of Planning and Zoning, invitation to collaborate? Is that essentially what you're trying to get to? It's Fred Selden who's invited, and he is the county planning and zoning.
So, I mean, one way, RA wholeheartedly accepts,
The invitation of,
well, I didn't even say that. RA wholeheartedly accepts Fairfax County Director of Planning and Zoning, Fred Selden's invitation to collaborate.
Yes.
mhm.
I think that, be okay with that?
Yep.
Take out the
RA
invitation.
wholly accepts, get the invitation out at the beginning, and of. The invitation of is struck, accepts Fairfax County Selden's, and then that invitation to collaborate with the county on a methodologically
That what you
sound
have?
estimate.
Okay, yep,
Yeah, and we got rid of that
Is that
second
what you
of
got?
Reston.
I accept those friendly amendments.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a motion on the table to approve the letter with the amendments as read by John and then wordsmith together with agreement there. Do we have a second?
I second.
Yeah, Julie has a second. Is there any discussion?
Get it out tomorrow.
If there's no discussion, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any? Thank you, Eric. Any opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, that motion passes. Thank you.
Is this letter online somewhere?
Larry, when will the letter get on?
The public has not seen it, what you just.
Yeah, so how do we?
Well, yeah, it
Well, it was in the packet.
was in the packet, but
The
For
packet
tonight's
doesn't-
meeting.
it will go up on the website come tomorrow.
So it's not been sent to the public?
No.
The letter doesn't specifically, RA is not specifically taking a position.
Is there any position taken? We can't even
The
tell.
density hit. I don't, my real quick reading of this does not indicate that you're for holding the cap at 13.
No numerical cap was discussed.
Correct.
We say there should, as John just read, we say there should be a cap, and that we want to work with
To
Fred
determine-
Selden on the cap, as he's invited us to do, but we haven't stated a specific number in the letter.
Do you think, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
for-
No, please, we can finish.
Okay.
You want to go up there?
The prop,
And just so you know, we're not going to get into any huge debate on this, but I'd like to understand your point. It's down at the very bottom, where it says push.
You haven't seen it.
Could you
There
state
you
your
go.
Address, please.
Bob Petrine, 2503 Foxcroft Way, Reston. My concern with the letter, because I found Fred Selden to be incredibly clever at obfuscating and misdirecting the discussion. Anytime he wants, he's got the power with this entire issue. And the fact that he will discuss a population limit does not directly state the position that I think we've all been very specific about, to hold the density cap to 13. By not doing that, given what's been approved in just the last couple of weeks with the density cap, the two of the three projects that will kick very close to the 13 density cap have been approved. They were approved on July 31st. And therefore, the county will be more likely to advertise the change to the zoning amendment now than ever before. And they will do it quickly, because there isn't anybody to object to it in August. And that's my concern by not mentioning it specifically here.
Specifically. Thank you, Bob. Perfect. All right, and again, the letter will be online as of tomorrow on the website for Larry. So, yes, John.
As the mover, I would like to make a motion to reconsider.
To add the number?
No, not to add the number, because the board has decided not to do that. However, what Bob just said makes me think we can avoid the pitfalls of what he has suggested. So I make a motion to reconsider.
Reconsider
And
what?
to reconsider the motion we just passed. This will be very brief.
Can we have a discussion on this without a motion? So let's just have a discussion, John.
Okay. Basically, I understand what Bob is saying, that this could be read as an implicit promise on the part of RA, or an implicit readiness, if not a promise, to agree upon a cap. And so what I would recommend is that you all have the text before you. So the target versus cap section.
Okay.
So we could say RA looks forward to coordinating with Fairfax County staff and the community on the methodology of establishing the cap, period.
Well, I think the
And the reason is, we have debated the methodology they've used
Right.
frequently
Yeah,
so we can
and that's the
continue
challenge,
talking
is
about the
how they
methodology
got to the number.
without agreeing even giving a hint that we would necessarily
Agree to an amendment.
agree to amendment. Once, we don't know what that agreement is. So that,
Well,
the
I
agreement
remember us
is not the
talking
cap,
about that,
but a
but there's a
discussion on
problem.
the methodology.
So,
There's
John,
not
okay, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, there's not, from what I've gathered is we don't even agree on how they got to the number in the first place.
Correct.
True.
So,
So the rest of that sentence is premature.
yeah.
Larry, I would like your comment, but
Can
you understand where I'm going?
John, can you reread what you're saying you want to change? Is it in
So-
B, one,
So
1B?
So one
Yeah.
AB, so where it says change to, okay?
So here,
Yeah.
okay.
So, so the motion I would like to make
Mm-hmm.
is to reconsider, and then if that motion passes, I would then move that we would end the sentence
On the methodology of
After
establishing a
establishing
cap.
a cap
period.
period.
Cap period.
And remove and initiating an amendment to the plan because we haven't even agreed to the methodology, much less the cap number.
and I would, because Larry has fought in,
Do
you
I think
agree?
that makes sense? Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. So just say
So,
establishing the cap period,
Period.
and then crossing out
Right.
the end of that sentence
Right.
that you read.
This is not an agreement to raise the cap.
exactly.
It's agreement to
But to
work on the
continue talking
methodology.
about the methodology,
If you think,
or the,
if you look at it, the county, in August of last year, wanted to do one thing, and that was to raise the density cap from 13 per acre to
That's it.
6.
and are
We
there,
have approved July 31st, two of the three projects that are in the pipeline that will get the 13.
We just make an
So
amendment
there, if they,
to the language.
Can you just make that
and
amendment?
if we're talking about population, that's,
Modify the letter
that's,
with one
yes, that
motion.
should be the key issue. But that
If you
doesn't
do a
get
motion, we
us to
consider.
immediate concern, which is
The density.
and I will tell you why it's important to continue talking about the methodology, because of our insistent, CPR and RA's insistent talking about the methodology on their own. They backed down from 16 to 15 last time, because we pointed out methodological errors, and we pointed out on the 30th other methodological errors. So, so anyway.
So can we just simply
Again, I would
amend?
move to reconsider the last motion.
There's a
Okay.
motion on the table. We have to.
So
vote.
Well, we
there's a
approved it.
motion now to
To re-
To
reconsider.
reconsider.
And as,
Do we have- do we-
as the mover of the motion, I can make that.
Anyone on the prevailing side can.
Anyone
Do we have a
voted for it.
second?
I'll second.
Okay, Karen's got a second. So, John, could you once again state how you would change the letter as that motion?
Very simply, I would end the last sentence after the words establishing the cap.
1B. And your letter here, on your.
1AB.
I'm going to fix this one.
1AB.
1AB, yeah. Larry, are you understanding where he's chopped
Yeah.
off the end of that sentence?
Striking and initiating an amendment to the plan once an agreement is met.
And because of your experience with the process, you would agree with that, Larry?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because, I mean, this almost suggests that they initiate a plan in a sort of backwards way.
Don't
For the
we have to
purpose-
vote on-
For the purposes of clarification, first we need to vote on the motion to reconsider. Then we have to do another motion.
Correct.
All right. So we have a motion to reconsider and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Eric?
Oh, sorry, yeah, aye.
Okay. Please say nay. Abstentions? Okay, motion carries. We're
Mr.
reconsidering.
Mr. President, I move that we amend the previously approved letter on the change sheet that we have before it, the board has before it. It is in section 1AB, and that we would change it by removing the end of the sentence. So the last sentence would read, RA looks forward to coordinating with Fairfax County staff and the community on the methodology of establishing the cap, period.
We have a second? Oh, we have a So that was a
There
motion.
needs to be a second.
Now we need a
Second.
second. We have a second from Julie. Now we have discussion. Ben?
So I'm not a lawyer or a wordsmith, but that whole change seems to be not of any consequence. I think if at all anything, if I was to clearly communicate my intentions, I would say that we are sticking to 13 and we are not open to any discussions about moving from 13, because what this seems to say is you're opening up conversations for some sort of discussions on methodology, and that's their day job, is to invite you to discussions on methodology, and that's how I think it came from 13 to 16. And I don't think taking a step back to 15 is helping the case in any way. That's how we all know most negotiations are done. So if at all, I would say, I would like to understand with this dialogue and letters, where are we headed? Are we trying to, do we have an objective, or are we trying to, I guess, trying to understand if the rest of the letter makes sense as well.
Any?
The letter is well written, but what are we
respond to
conveying in
that.
there?
Please.
I would say two things, Vin. First of all, the Reston Association had decided throughout the process not to do that, not to name a cap number. And secondly, what we have done instead is to demand reasonableness and justification for anything that has been put down. And I think that has served us well thus far, and I think it's the best path forward from here. Larry,
I would only add that, I think a good statement, John. I would add that, in the dealings that we've had with the county, the impression is out that they are frankly going to, change the ordinance, whether 90% of the community don't like it or not.
Right.
And what has been important to the association thus far is understanding down to the smallest widget why it has to go there, but also getting them to acknowledge that there is language in other comprehensive plans, such as Tyson's, that should be in Reston's plan. And so what we're trying to do is make the Reston master plan more nimble for whatever future changes might come. Because we can't really predict more than 5 or 6 years down the road, I don't think, from a land use perspective. Economy, there's all kinds of factors at play. So we're trying to get some other things incorporated into the plan that are very important to the community, not just the immediate density cap issue. And so that's part of what we've been working on as well.
I call the
That makes
question?
sense to me. I think we're discussing. We're at discussion
Did Eric
point.
want to say
Eric
something?
wants to say something.
Just a quick thought, right? I think there's value in getting beyond the number conversation, and I'm on the record. I'm for the number. I'm for 13, right? Until I see infrastructure and other things that come forth. So anybody listening, I'm not moving from that. But we've fallen into this sort of polarized conversation of 13, 15, 13, 16. We're not having meaningful dialogue with the county on caring for this community. All of our conversations in the county come down to one number. And I like the approach of if we're not letting go of 13, I think a lot of us have held to that. But this is a new way to try to engage the county. Right? We've got CPR pushing in their direction, and that's good. We're not opposed to them at all. But this gives us kind of another trust to say, hey, we want you to show some homework, and we want to start the conversation this way.
That makes good sense, Eric. Based upon Ben's comment, again, I wrote a sentence that is, maybe I'll read out loud just to see if it makes any sense. So John had us finish that paragraph with RA looks forward to coordinating with Fairfax County staff and the community on the methodology of establishing the cap, period. Possible adder based upon Ben's comment could be something like, RA does not yet understand or accept any change from the PRC current density per acre cap of 13 until such a collaborative review is agreed and finalized.
I don't like the does not
I
understand
wouldn't-
part.
I wouldn't get into that.
Okay. I just wanted to
Yeah.
try and put something in words around
No,
what I think
I know
Ben
it, I know,
was trying to
I know.
say, or what Ben said that I could.
I think, like I said, what would be a good legal way to say that? My concern is that we've let CPR in many ways lead this effort, and we have folks from the CPR here saying that they think that the number 13 should show up. They think that this discussion is not headed anywhere. And I felt like that. I've spoken about that as well. I certainly support everything that the sport is doing, but I feel like we should, if we get an opportunity, look at other ways to be more assertive.
John.
Mr. Chairman, as many know, and perhaps I should say, I am one of the members, indeed one of the original members of CPR. So I've been through the process on both sides, and we've agreed that sometimes we say the same, sometimes we agree on saying the same things, sometimes we say complementary things, which move to the same point but don't say exactly the same thing. And in this case, for very principled reasons, which it would be too long and not advantageous to discuss in this forum.
Right.
We've decided not to name a number. But I would, having said that, I would like to make a friendly amendment to my amendment. And that is, in the last, rather than say RA looks forward to coordinating with Fairfax County staff on the methodology, I'd like to say RA looks forward to continuing the discussion with Fairfax County on the methodology, because we have had this conversation on methodology since last fall. And to say, this is not a new offer. So RA looks forward to continuing
Our discussions.
the discussion with Fairfax County.
All right.
Mr. President, if I may offer a sentence that might arrive at what you were attempting to get at and what Ben was attempting to get at.
Maybe.
Ending it with currently RA does not believe that there is a sufficient basis for deviating from the current cap. So after you go through the methodology, you're simply saying right now, we don't believe that you've sufficiently proven your case.
Yeah, because I wrote something about justification for proposed change, or
Just an offering.
I'm being swayed both ways by all these good arguments. I'm feeling, that there's good sound reasoning for both, and so we just need to. I do like what Tony just described of saying, with what we, and I'll use just layman's terms, not what would be in a letter, but with what we know now, we don't feel there's a need. So
Right.
educate us. Continue to educate us, so where we both can agree that yes, we understand the data points such that, but where we sit now, we don't.
so
agree.
the last statement would read, RA looks forward to continuing the discussion with Fairfax County staff and the community on the methodology of establishing the cap, period.
Currently, RA does not believe that there is a sufficient basis for deviating from the current cap.
I personally would recommend against that. And Larry, I need you because we've been fighting this battle for a long time together. I think it, and it would not be beneficial to discuss this in detail. But if you disagree, Larry, let me know.
Well, what I was going to say actually a couple minutes ago, the RA board has not taken a position on a specific number.
Correct.
And the reason for that is, because of the collaboration that we've done with Fairfax County, and will continue to do, quite frankly, on way more fronts than just land use.
Right.
And it was to get educated about what number made sense. Because, and I'm not speaking for the board here, but I think
But you're
the
reflecting-
prior board and
Yes.
the current board, I think if there is reason that the county can prove to us, and they're willing to put in additional monitoring and implementation plans and change the language of the comp plan,
Parks.
to reflect that maybe they miscalculated initially with the comp plan, then maybe, I'm just throwing numbers out, right? Then maybe a number of 13.5 works. But that, we don't have that information.
Right.
So
I would put it in.
So my point with that is that, this takes more of a position, which I'm sure a lot of people in the community would like to see. But I'm just saying that has not been the tack of the board, the prior board or this current board.
And I think I'd like to close this off after I seek, and then I want to have John say one more thing as the one who's got the amendment on the table. But I think I've just been listening to all this, convinced that I've read this letter. I think it's a good letter. I think the letter describes the outcomes where we came to agreement on things. It describes in good detail those items that need further work, that we're expecting further work for us to get to a point where we understand the methodologies. And now John's added some nice language that really states that very explicitly. And if we have to do another letter, if we have to enter in the number discussion, to me that's probably a subsequent letter and not this letter. And I think that's where I'm landing on my head after listening to all this. If it's okay, I'm going to ask John as the originator of this. And just to finalize, the current motion we have is the one that says, RA looks forward to continuing the discussion with Fairfax County staff and the community on the methodology of establishing the cap period. That's the current motion
And
on the
that's
table
what-
with the friendly amendment.
Correct.
Seconded by me.
There
We're good.
are several other pending friendly amendments. John can choose to accept them or not based on the wordsmithing.
And that's the one we have, and John, if you could state where you are, and I'm
where
ready to call
I
the
am is
question.
I would like to stay with this version of the amendment. And just in a sentence,
Yes.
when you don't have legal power to coerce the county to do something, there are two other powers that remain for us. One is political power, and as a member of CPR, I won't go into the ways in which I've helped with that. But there's another thing, which good old Mahatma Gandhi called truth force. There is a power to truth. And we have insisted that we want a reason to show what the truth is.
Right.
We have made it not an act of the will, but an act of reason.
Mhm.
And it's on that basis that I would like to keep it clean that way.
That makes sense to me. Thank you for sharing.
My
And is
second
it-
remains.
And your second remains to the friendly amendment, okay? So we've got a motion on the table. Any last comments before we call the question? I call the question. All those in favor of this reconsidered motion with the renewed text? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed, please say nay. This motion to reconsider with the renewed text
Was there an abstention?
passes.
No,
Okay.
I support it. I like the letter. I read it, I understand it, and I support the letter. I just think that if two members spoke up and that made us reconsider, then perhaps we should be more assertive in our position. But like you said, that's perhaps part of the day, another letter. this letter. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for anyone still watching. Thank you, Bob, for helping us think that through. Anyone watching, thank you for taking that as we sort of wandered our way through finalizing that letter. The letter will be up on the website as of tomorrow, and it will be going under my signature to the county as of tomorrow. Correct, Larry? Okay.
I believe you're coming over here at some
I am
point
coming
tomorrow.
over here
so
tomorrow
we
for a
will-
meeting with you at 1:30, so I will look forward to getting the handy pen out at that stage. Perfect. Thank you very much. One really important discussion, and I loved hearing the different viewpoints. There's a lot of correct things that people are saying that you just have to kind of pile together and come up with the best way to fit them together. And I think this team is doing it, so thank you for that. If we move on to the next agenda item, that is an executive session to discuss contractual and personnel matters. So at this stage, could I take a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, please say, thank you, Eric. Any opposed, please say nay. Abstentions? Okay, we're going to go into executive session to discuss personnel and contractual matters. And thank you so much for staying, anyone who's there, and we're going to close off the meeting here at this point and then adjourn after we come out of executive session.
Yes.
Okay, we are back from executive session, and if I could ask Director Mooney to give us our cleansing motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Reston Association Board of Directors certify to the best of each member's knowledge that only those matters appropriate for executive session of a personnel, contractual, or legal nature were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during executive session.
It's been moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, so we've got a second. Here, no discussion. Do we have any discussion? No. Let's call the question. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please? Any opposed, please say nay.
Mr. President, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Amen.
all those in favor,
Aye.
please say amen.
Amen.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.